Before we begin, if stories about quiet dignity and earned success speak to you, hit like, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, and subscribe, because what happens in the next few minutes might change the way you look at every person you've ever underestimated. Now let's get into it. The auction hall smelled of leather, cedar, and old money. Under the high wooden beams of the Whitmore Ranch Pavilion, 300 people in tailored blazers and polished boots sipped champagne while waiting for the night's main event. The sale of the legendary Silverbrook cattle estate, 4,000 acres of prime grazing land that had belonged to one family for 3 generations. Everyone who mattered in the regional agriculture and investment world was there. And standing near the back, wearing a faded denim jacket, worn boots, and a plain gray shirt was a man named Caleb Renner, holding a paddle number like everyone else, but looking, to most eyes, like he had wandered in by mistake. He wasn't there to be noticed. He never was. Caleb had learned a long time ago that the men who make the most noise in a room are rarely the ones who leave with what they came for. He sipped his water, checked his watch, and waited, the way he always waited, patient as stone. Then he heard the laugh. That laugh, sharp, theatrical, designed to be heard. "Caleb, is that actually you?" He turned, and there she was. Vivian Cross, though she went by a different last name now, dressed in a cream silk dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, diamonds catching the chandelier light at her ears, her hand resting on the arm of a tall man in an immaculate charcoal suit. Vivian had been his wife once, 7 years ago, before she decided that a struggling rancher with more debt than dreams wasn't the future she wanted. She had walked out with 2 suitcases and a closing line that still echoed in his memory on quiet nights. "You'll spend your whole life exactly like this." Caleb, small, stuck, nothing. She hadn't looked back once. Now here she was, looking him up and down with a smile that was more smirk than warmth. "Well, look at you," she said, loud enough for the small cluster of people near them to hear. "Still dressing like you're about to muck out a barn. Some things never change, I suppose." A few soft chuckles rippled through the group. The man beside her, whom she introduced with obvious pride as her husband, Desmond Waverly, a name Caleb recognized vaguely from agribusiness headlines, extended a hand with the kind of firm, appraising grip men use when they're deciding whether you're worth their time. "Desmond Waverly," he said. "Waverly Grain and Livestock Holdings." "And you are?" "Caleb," he said simply. No last name, no title, no explanation. Just Caleb. Vivian laughed again, softer this time, almost pitying. "Caleb used to have a little spread out past Route 9, or he did last I heard. I'm surprised you're even here tonight, sweetheart. This isn't exactly your crowd." She said it kindly enough on the surface, the way people say cruel things when they want plausible deniability. But everyone in earshot understood exactly what she meant. "This man doesn't belong here." Caleb didn't argue. He didn't correct her. He simply nodded, said it was good to see her doing well, and excused himself to look at the auction catalog. He had learned, in the years since she left, that the loudest response to being underestimated is often silence, because silence gives people enough rope to embarrass themselves completely, and he had all the patience in the world to watch it happen. If you're enjoying this so far, make sure you're subscribed, because the next part is where things start turning in a direction nobody in that room saw coming. What Vivian didn't know, what almost nobody in that gleaming pavilion knew, was that the 7 years since she walked out hadn't broken Caleb. They had built him. After she left, he had lost the ranch, yes, foreclosed on 8 months later, when the bank called in loans he couldn't cover alone. He had lost the truck, the equipment, nearly lost his sense of who he was. He slept in the back of a borrowed trailer for 4 months, working construction by day and studying land valuation and agricultural finance by lamplight at night, teaching himself what none of his formal schooling ever had. He had one ally through all of it, a weathered old ranch hand named Otis Grimes, who had worked for Caleb's father before him and refused to leave even when there was no money to pay him. "I didn't stay for the paycheck, son," Otis told him once, sitting on the tailgate of that borrowed trailer eating canned beans. "I stayed because I've seen how you think. You don't think like a man who loses. You think like a man who's early." Otis was right. Caleb started small, absurdly small. He leased 4 acres nobody wanted, degraded soil that everyone assumed was worthless, and using techniques he'd studied obsessively, rotational grazing, soil regeneration, water table management, he turned it profitable within 18 months. He reinvested every dollar. He leased more land. He started advising other struggling ranchers quietly, for a modest fee, helping them save operations that banks had already written off as dead. Word spread slowly the way real reputations do, not through advertising but through results. One rancher telling another, one bank officer noticing that Renner-advised properties kept outperforming projections. By year 3, he wasn't leasing land anymore. He was buying it, using capital investors trusted him with because he had never once overpromised and never once failed to deliver. By year 5, Caleb Renner owned, through a holding company that deliberately kept a low public profile, working ranch operations across 4 states, 22,000 acres total, along with a controlling stake in an agricultural technology firm that built soil monitoring systems now used by ranches twice the size of Silverbrook. He drove an old truck because he liked that truck. He wore denim because denim was practical, and he had never seen the point in performing wealth for people who couldn't see past a price tag anyway. Otis, now his operations director and closest friend, had told him more than once that he should dress the part when he walked into rooms like this one. Caleb always said the same thing back, "Let them underestimate me. It's cheaper than advertising." Across the pavilion, a silver-haired man in a tan blazer had been watching Caleb since he walked in, and now he made his way over with the kind of brisk purpose that turns heads. "Mr. Renner," he said, extending a hand. "Halbert Cross, Regional Director for the Cattlemen's Alliance. I didn't expect to see you here personally. We've been trying to get a meeting on your calendar for months regarding the Water Rights Consortium." Vivian, still standing nearby with her champagne, went very still. Desmond's eyes narrowed slightly, the practiced smile of a man recalibrating in real time. Caleb shook Halbert's hand warmly, told him his assistant would follow up, and the two spoke for a few minutes about irrigation infrastructure before Halbert excused himself, throwing one last comment over his shoulder. "Whatever you decide on Silverbrook tonight, the Alliance would love your read on it. Nobody understands land valuation in this region the way you do." Vivian's champagne glass had stopped halfway to her lips. "If this story is pulling you in, this is exactly the moment to comment below with one word. Watching. So I know you're still here. Because what's coming next is the part everyone's been waiting for." The auctioneer took the stage, and the energy in the room sharpened instantly. Silverbrook Estate was the crown jewel of the evening. 4,000 acres with senior water rights, existing infrastructure, and a location that made it one of the most strategically valuable properties to hit the market in a decade. Bidding opened at $8 million. Desmond Waverly raised his paddle almost immediately, and Vivian squeezed his arm with visible pride, leaning close to whisper something that made him smile. 2 other bidders, both recognizable agribusiness names, jumped in quickly, pushing the number past 10 million within minutes. The room buzzed. Desmond kept bidding, confident, almost performative about it, glancing toward Vivian after every raise as if each number were a gift he was placing at her feet. Caleb hadn't moved. He stood near the back, paddle resting against his leg, watching the numbers climb the way a man watches weather roll in, calm, unhurried, reading something the rest of the room couldn't yet see. At 14 million, one of the other bidders dropped out. At 16, the second followed, leaving only Desmond, visibly energized now, and a quiet insurance-backed buyer bidding by phone through a representative near the front. The auctioneer's voice climbed with the tension. 18 million. Desmond raised his paddle again without hesitation, and a scattering of applause broke out, people already assuming the sale was decided. That was when Caleb lifted his paddle. The room didn't understand at first. A murmur passed through the crowd, the kind of confused ripple that happens when something doesn't fit the picture people had already drawn. The auctioneer, unbothered, called the new bid 20 million. Desmond turned around fully now, scanning the room until his eyes landed on Caleb, and for the first time all evening, his expression lost its polish. Vivian's face had gone pale, her mouth slightly open, the champagne forgotten in her hand. Desmond raised again 22 million, his voice tighter now, something proving itself in front of his wife. Caleb answered without flinching, 25. A few gasps scattered through the crowd. The phone bidder dropped out entirely. It was down to 2 men, one in a $100,000 suit, and one in a denim jacket that had seen better years. Desmond's paddle stayed at his side for a long moment. He glanced at Vivian, who was staring at Caleb now with an expression that had nothing to do with pity anymore. Then Desmond raised his paddle one final time, 28 million, and the room held its breath. Caleb set down his water glass. He didn't rush. He didn't perform. He simply raised his paddle and said in a voice that carried without needing to be loud, 32 million, and I'll close in cash within the week. The silence that followed was total. The auctioneer, stunned for half a second, called for any further bids. None came. The gavel dropped. Silverbrook Estate belonged to Caleb Renner. The applause that broke out wasn't polite anymore. It was genuine, the kind reserved for people who had just done something nobody expected. Men who had ignored Caleb all evening were suddenly moving toward him, hands extended, business cards appearing. Albert Cross reached him first, grinning. I told you nobody in this region reads land like you do. Welcome to the neighborhood, neighbor. Someone from a regional bank asked if he'd consider serving as an advisor to their agricultural lending division. Another man, representing a national ranching conglomerate, asked if Renner Holdings might be open to a joint venture on a water reclamation project. Caleb answered each of them the same way he answered everything. Calm, direct, no performance necessary because the results in the room were doing all the talking for him. Vivian hadn't moved from her spot. She stood frozen, watching a man she had once told would amount to nothing become, in the span of 20 minutes, the most respected person in the entire pavilion. Desmond, to his credit, walked over first, extending his hand with something that looked almost like genuine respect, wrestling with wounded pride. That was a hell of a number, Renner. I didn't see that coming. Caleb shook his hand. Most people don't, that's usually the point. Desmond studied him a moment longer, then said quietly, if you're ever open to partnering on future acquisitions, I'd like that conversation. A small, honest concession from a man realizing he had badly misjudged the competition. If you've ever been counted out by someone who thought they knew your whole story, tell me in the comments because this next part is for you. It was nearly an hour later, after most of the crowd had thinned and the celebratory conversations had quieted, that Vivian found him near the entrance alone, checking something on his phone before heading out to the truck Otis was bringing around. She approached slowly, none of the earlier confidence in her posture. Caleb, she said, and her voice had lost its edge entirely. I owe you an apology, not just for tonight, for all of it. He looked at her, and there was no triumph in his eyes, no desire to make her sit in the moment longer than necessary. You don't owe me anything, Vivian. I do, she said, and for a moment the polished version of her cracked just slightly. I looked at where you were 7 years ago and I decided that was who you'd always be. I never gave you the chance to become anything else because I didn't believe you could. I was wrong, and I think some part of me has known that for a long time. Caleb nodded slowly. No bitterness in his face, only a quiet kind of peace that comes from a man who has already made his peace with the past. You believed what you saw in front of you. I can't fault you for that. But people aren't just the worst season of their life, Vivian. They're what they build afterward. She wiped quickly at her eyes, embarrassed, and asked if there was any chance someday they could at least be civil, maybe even friendly. He told her that time had already answered that question for both of them, that he had built a life he was proud of, one that didn't need her validation to feel complete, but that he wished her well sincerely and meant it. There was no anger left in him to spend on her, only the settled calm of a man who had turned every hard year into something worth having. 3 months later, the sign above the entrance to Silverbrook read differently. Renner Regenerative Ranching. It announced in simple lettering, no gold trim, no unnecessary flourish, just a name earned through years nobody saw. Otis stood beside Caleb at the gate the morning the first cattle were moved onto the new pasture land. The same man who had eaten canned beans with him in a borrowed trailer 7 years earlier, now watching thousands of acres of restored, thriving land stretch out in front of them. You ever think about that auction house? Otis asked, squinting into the morning sun. Every single person in that room misjudged you the second you walked in. Caleb smiled, watching the cattle move slowly across land that had once belonged to someone else's legacy, and now belonged to the one he'd built with his own 2 hands. Let them misjudge, he said. It's never been my job to convince anyone of my worth. My job was just to keep working until the truth became impossible to ignore. That's the whole story. And if it meant something to you, I hope you carry one thing from it. You don't have to prove anything to the people who doubted you. Because time and consistent, quiet work will always speak louder than any argument ever could. If you enjoyed this journey, smash that like button, leave a comment telling me which part hit you hardest, and subscribe for more stories like this one. I'll see you in the next video.